Hey, so maybe you've heard of the phrase coding bootcamp. Nowadays, a lot of different businesses and universities are offering coding boot camps. And the idea is that if you want to start a career in programming or development or just technology in general, you can attend a coding boot camp. And this is an alternative to sort of teaching yourself or being self-taught, right? Which can take a long time. The idea behind a boot camp is that someone who's experienced sort of takes you on a guided journey of what you should learn first and then the next steps. And this way you can learn a lot in a very short amount of time, right? It's very condensed and accelerated. Now, boot camps are great, but not everyone can financially afford to go to a coding boot camp. And even if a camp was free or offered scholarships, not everyone can commit or invest the time to go to a boot camp. So, what you're watching right now is a boot camp series that's going to address both of those issues. Number one, it's freely available on YouTube, as you're watching it right now. And number two, it doesn't require a huge time commitment because each lesson is broken up into little bite-sized videos. And I think most people can commit maybe 10 to 20, 30 minutes a night each lesson. My cat just came and almost knocked the tripod over right now. Anyways, so let's talk about what we're going to cover in this bootcamp series. There are 5 main chapters. Let's go over them. Really quick before we jump into the 5-chapter guide, this is what's going on. This is why the tripod was shaking and moving. There's no stopping her. She's unstoppable. So these are the 5 chapters we're going to work through in order to learn how code can be used to create user experiences and applications. So the chapters are design, programming, servers, databases, and user authentication. Now, right away, before we go any further, I do want to say that this bootcamp is focused on web development, so websites and web apps. And right now, I want to explain why that's our focus. Because it's not just websites for the sake of websites, right? The year is not 1999. It's not like websites are the newest, hottest technology. That's not the world we live in any longer. However, the reason we're going to focus on web development is because it's the most universal and accessible platform there is. And I'll explain what I mean by that in just a moment. But I want to make it clear that even if you're interested in creating native apps for iPhone or iPad or Android devices or desktop apps for Windows, Mac, or Linux, well, I would say this early on in your career, don't worry about the platform. That's too specific of a goal this early on in your journey. And regardless of which platform or type of device you want to create for, these 5 topics on the screen are always going to be involved. So, even if you're not interested in websites or web development, working through this series is going to teach you the basic building blocks that all user experiences and applications use. It just so happens that the web has both the lowest barrier of entry to create for and is the most universally available or accessible platform, right? Because it doesn't matter what type of device you're using, an iPhone, an Android phone, a tablet, laptop, or desktop, every modern device has a web browser. So that is why we're focusing on web development in this series. Not because it's the best platform, but simply because we need a platform to jump into in order to learn about these 5 topics. And the web is both the easiest and most ubiquitous platform to jump into. Okay, now before we move on to the actual first lesson of our first chapter, let's take a minute to manage our expectations. So right up front, I want to be honest and transparent with you. We are not going to become experts in all 5 of these topics in this series. And the good news is, we don't need to be. I've worked in this industry for 15 years now, and I know that myself and any of my peers or coworkers or those above me, well, I shouldn't say no one, but very, very few people are experts in all 5 of these things. Usually, you specialize in 1 or 2 or 3 of them. Having said that, I do think it's super beneficial to be at least a little bit familiar with all of them. And most importantly, understand how they all fit together to create something meaningful. I actually think that's one of the most attractive traits someone can have while interviewing for a job in this industry. So not lying about their abilities and acting like they're super strong in every area, but instead just being familiar with the basic vocabulary of each of the topics and understanding how the puzzle pieces fit together. Because someone like that is going to be able to work well with others and be able to synergize with coworkers who all have different specialties. Anyways, back to this bootcamp series. Our goal in this series is not to become an expert in any of these 5 topics. Our goal is simply to get a bird's eye view of everything, get our hands dirty with a bunch of different technologies, and build our big picture understanding. Once we've accomplished that together, it's going to be up to you to continue learning and researching and specializing in the area or areas that you find the most interesting. Okay, so with that in mind, don't get discouraged if some of the topics don't excite you. Most people are not going to be equally excited by all of these 5 things. Your job throughout this series is to pay attention to which topic really lights your brain on fire. Because my career advice is always follow your interests, follow your curiosity, follow what excites you, what you could easily geek out on because it seems fun to you. Okay, now that's enough introduction or rambling to last a lifetime. Let's jump into the actual action of this series. Right now, let's begin with Chapter 1, which is design. Now, because we're focusing on web development, that means we're going to learn how to design or build a web page. Okay, and right now I want you to follow along with me. So in a new tab, I want you to Google or search for Codepen. Before I even explain what Codepen is, let's just go ahead and visit the website. So it's codepen.io. Okay, the website should look something like this. And usually somewhere in the top left corner, we're looking for this Start Coding or Create New Pen button. So let's go ahead and click that. Okay, and then you should see a screen that looks something like this. Now, before we worry about what Codepen is, and even before we worry about what HTML means, do this with me. In this column of HTML where we can begin typing here, let's type the word hello. And then notice down here, you see a preview of what you just created. Okay, and then what if after the word hello, I drop down to a new line and say, hey? Well, down in the preview area for our web page, notice that hey is not on a new line. This is because building a web page is not like typing into a word processing document. Web pages are created using a language named HTML, which stands for Hypertext Markup Language, which is just a nerdy way of saying a language that lets us describe content. So, for example, if we did want a new piece of text to sit on a new line, how would we accomplish that? Well, let me show you. So in the HTML column here, let me give myself a clean slate. So I'll delete what I had. And let's imagine I want a large headline that says welcome. And then below that, I want a standard or regular piece of text that says the sky is blue. Well, this is what I would do in HTML. I would say less than symbol, H1 greater than symbol. So this stands for heading 1. And don't worry about the less than and greater than symbols for right now. I will explain that in just a moment. And then I can include whatever phrase I want. So in this case, I'll say welcome to the page. Okay, and then this is less than / H1 greater than. I'll talk about what these mean and how they work in just a moment. But then on a new line below that, if I just want a standard piece of text, well, in HTML, P is for paragraph. So I can have this symbol and say, the sky is blue. Okay, and notice that that does sit on a new separate line below the other piece of content. Okay, now at this point, let's backtrack a little bit and talk about what exactly Codepen is and really just what's going on here in general. So Codepen is a super convenient place or playground to come to when you want to experiment with creating a web page. So it gives us a place to type our code, and then down here, this is the web page that our code creates. Okay, now let's talk a little bit more about what we typed into this HTML area. So we have two pieces of content, right? We have a headline and a standard paragraph. The technical name in HTML for each of these is an element, right? We have a heading level 1 element and we have a paragraph element. Okay, let's talk about the actual syntax of the code for a moment. So this section that I'm highlighting right now, this is what's called the opening tag. Okay, and then this section that I'm highlighting right now, this is called a closing tag. So the idea is you use different types of tags to sort of create a sandwich, and whatever you want to include inside goes here. So this is our way of saying, hey, web browser, we want to start a heading level 1, and then this is our way of saying, hey, web browser, we're done with the heading level 1, right? It's a self-contained element. Practice makes perfect, so let's try to create a bulleted list. And in HTML, the code for a bulleted list is UL, which stands for unordered list. So I will say less than, UL, greater than, right? That's the opening tag. And for an example, imagine I want to create a grocery list. So I would say apples, drop down celery, drop down carrots. Well, notice down in our actual web page, they are not sitting on a new line for each item, and this is definitely not a bulleted list. Remember, this is because typing out HTML is not like a word processing document. HTML in the web browser does not care that I drop down to a new line after each one of these words. Right? And even if I try to close out the unordered list with a closing UL tag here, that doesn't matter. So instead, let me show you what we really need to do. Inside the unordered list element, right? So within it, in between the opening and closing tags, what we need to do is include a list item element for each item in our list. In HTML, the code for that is LI, which stands for list item. So I can say apples, and then on the new line, I can say opening LI tag, closing LI tag, celery. Maybe include one more just for practice, opening tag, carrots, closing LI tag. And we see that that absolutely does create a bulleted list. The big idea here that I want you to remember is that in HTML, we can nest one element inside of another element. Right? So our list item elements are nested inside of our unordered list element. Okay, now at this point, I want to circle back to when I said that the HTML acronym, which stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Remember when I said that that was just a nerdy way of saying a language for describing content? Well, maybe that's starting to make sense now, right? So we described this piece of content as a headline. We described this piece of content as a paragraph, and we described this piece of content as an unordered list. Now, what if instead of a bulleted list, we wanted this to be a numbered list? Well, I could just change it from UL to OL. So change the opening UL tag to OL. Make sure your closing tag is also now OL. This stands for ordered list instead of unordered list, and now we have a numbered list. Cool. Now, before we go any further, I do want to show you a fun tip. And this has nothing to do with HTML or web pages, and it has everything to do with the Codepen environment that we're in right now. But essentially, this is going to make typing out HTML a lot easier. So just for practice, let me delete my list. And check this out. If you want to create, let's say, an unordered list element, you can just type UL and then hit Tab on your keyboard. And Codepen will automatically set up the matching and closing tags for you. So then inside that, if I want to create a list item, I can just say LI, hit Tab on my keyboard. Okay, so that should make typing out HTML a lot easier for us. So let's just practice again. So apples, LI, tab, carrots, LI, tab, celery. Moving on, at this point, we know how to add different types of text content to our web page, but what about images? So what if we wanted to add a photograph to our web page? Well, below our list, let's add a new line, and in HTML, the code for an image is img. Less than, img, greater than, and an image is a bit different from these other types of content we've been creating in the sense that we do not need a closing tag. meaning we don't need one of these. And this is because it's not as if we're just going to type a bit of text inside this. That's not how images work, right? Instead, you would need to point towards a photograph or an image file. So let me get rid of this placeholder text and also get rid of the closing image tag. So instead, how this works is we just have the opening image tag, and then after the G, but before the greater than symbol, let's add a space and say src equals, and then a pair of quotes. Let me explain what's going on here. So this is our first time seeing an attribute in HTML. There are all sorts of different attributes in HTML. This particular one, src, stands for source. So we're saying the source for this image should equal, and then inside these quotes, we just need to point towards an image file, right? Most likely a JPEG. Now don't worry, in a future video, we will indeed learn how to upload or use our own photographs. But for right now, in this video, that's not the point. So instead, let's just use a photo that's already up on the web. So Codepen makes this very easy for us. Down in the bottom left corner, we see down here something called assets. So click on assets. And then in this left-hand area, click on photos. Okay, this is going to pull in free photos from the Unsplash website, but right here we can search. So I'm going to search for a photo of a puppy, push enter. Okay, and then when you see a photo you like, just go ahead and click on it. And that's going to copy the web address for that photo into your clipboard. So now we can close this photo screen. Back in our code, inside the quotes, right? So we say source or src equals quotes. In between the quotes, just paste in your clipboard. It might take a moment to load because this photo is huge, but there is the image. Now the image is so large that we can't even see it, so let me show you what we can do. On our image element, maybe before src, so again, right after the G in image, add a space, and I'm just going to say width equals quotes, and maybe say 400. Cool, so now the image is only going to display as 400 pixels wide. If yours isn't working, just make sure that you typed width correctly. That's a very common typo I see. And while we're at it, let's be sure to give this image element one more attribute. So after the G, let's say alt, so ALT equals quotes, and I will say a puppy with fluffy fur. Whenever you include an image element on your page, you do want to be sure to include an alt value. So the alt text is used if for some reason the image can't load, or if someone is visually impaired, their software can read the alt text to them. Big picture, the alt value just goes a long way towards making our web page more accessible. Now really quick, I do want to circle back to this width equals 400 bit of code. So as we can see, technically that does work. However, this is not the most flexible or optimal way of controlling the size of an image. So the question becomes, well, what is the optimal way, or what is the best way? Well, that brings us to the topic for our next video, which is CSS. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and it's how we add design to our pages, right? Because you're likely thinking, why does our web page look so boring? Well, it's because HTML is just the raw content, right? It's our way of describing the content or giving semantic meaning to the content. And then it's up to CSS to actually add the design. So CSS is how we control the color, the size, the shape, the spacing, the positioning, the alignment, so on and so forth. And in our very next lesson, we're going to learn about CSS. Actually, for the next several videos, we're going to stay in Chapter 1, which is Design. And this is what we're starting with because this is what the visitors of our websites and applications, it's what they see and feel and click on and scroll through. Now, once we're familiar with the basics of web design, so HTML and CSS, then we can move on to the more advanced chapters, right, where you can learn how to actually make your websites do something instead of just sitting there like a brochure. But we need to learn how to walk before we can run. Anyways, that's going to bring this first video in this bootcamp series to a close. Now, I've had a YouTube channel for over a decade now, and I've never once begged for likes, subscribers, or comments. But with this bootcamp series, I think now is the time for me to be shameless and start doing that. For two reasons. One, obviously I'd like this YouTube channel to grow, but the second reason is I think this bootcamp series has the potential to help a lot of people. So if you can spread the word, maybe share the video with your friends or family, I'd really appreciate it. Anyways, take care, and I'll catch you in the next video.